All members of the committee are present. Councilwoman Swank, Councilman Avens, Chairman Winkle, other council members present are Councilman Jacobs, Councilman Schaefer, Councilwoman Awig, Councilman DeVries. We have Council Clerk Gollum from the administration. We have Mayor Corcoran and our Planning and Economic Development Director Lieber. So the first order of business, we have the minutes of January 16th before us. Is there any corrections or comments on the minutes? Seeing none, those minutes stand as recorded. Today, we're here to discuss 2024-26, an ordinance providing for the amendment of Chapter 1444 Building Permits and Fees of North Ridgeville Building and Housing Code, and the establishment of a new Chapter 1010 Engineering Permits and Fees in the Streets, Utilities, and Public Services Code. So I'd like to start off by asking our Economic Development Director, Lieber, for an explanation, please.
Or I can use the mayor's microphone. Okay, can you hear me now? Thank you, Mr. Chair. The origin of this legislation was originally the update of fees connected to our sign permit after the new sign code went into effect last summer. So we needed to update 1444, and then we had also had some discussion around adding credit card fees to our schedule of charges to pass those through to applicants, just because those costs have increased over time and people's use of credit cards has increased as well. So in review of Chapter 1444 for those changes that would need to be made, I found more than a dozen issues, redundancies, inconsistencies, conflicts in some of the fees and charges that kind of jumped out that I thought we also needed to address. Also, Chapter 1444 is part of our building code, yet additions had been made in the recent past to include engineering fees, inspection requirements, construction standards, and I thought those would more properly belong in the Streets, Utilities, and Public Services Code. You know, building and engineering work together routinely on development, but they are different in how their fee and deposit structures work. So building tends to be more fee-based. You pay a simple permit fee, whereas engineering typically collects deposits and then deducts their time from those deposits. They also have different approaches to inspections. Building tends to be kind of a one and done. You know, you have an installation of some equipment, they check it out, it's good, they're done. Engineering tends to track progress, and so they might visit sites multiple times over days, weeks, or months for large projects. So some of their other requirements also reflect some of those differences, and by trying to address that in a one-size-fits-all approach in Chapter 1444 wasn't really working out too well, mostly to the detriment on the engineering side. So as a result, this kind of simple update for the sign code and the credit card fee became a little bit of a bigger project and something that we've been working on collectively since then. So the amendments to Chapter 1444 were intended to simplify and restructure permits into categories, to add some missing permit types, just simple things like alphabetizing miscellaneous permits and making sure that we weren't saying something twice or being very clear about what kind of permit we are discussing. We did not increase any costs, so this is not a legislative update where we're raising fees. What we did do, though, is roll administrative fees into the base fee permit. So we had a separate administrative fee, and it was a different fee amount for different kinds of permits. But it seemed challenging, and then with the software system we used, there really didn't seem to be any reason to account for a separate administrative fee. We also standardized rates for extra inspections. So that was one of those areas of inconsistency where different areas of 1444 talked about a different rate depending on what number of reinspection you might be on for your project. So we standardized that. Furthermore, in 1444, we removed the section that allowed for waiver of fees for weather-related work. So I just note that the mayor still has some authority to waive permit fees subject to limitations in, I think, his administrative code chapter. So On a case-by-case basis, there might be conditions and situations where that fee waiver would be appropriate. But in 2023, the city lost almost $18,000 in permit revenue, like revenue to us, based upon waivers for weather-related work. And also another interesting statistic that about 24% of the roof permits issued in 2023 got a fee waiver claiming storm damage. Sometimes the statistics seem a little out of whack with reality to me, and you kind of, not to impugn any of the contractors, but you kind of wonder if someone has learned maybe how to work a system and if it really was indeed a weather-related replacement or if it's something that would have happened anyway. So we're trying to do what we can to make sure the city's getting the revenue it needs to operate efficiently. On the other side, the engineering side, we're proposing a new Chapter 1010, and that will be a new chapter in our Streets, Utilities, and Public Services Code, and that will be the catch-all location for engineering fees, and this can also be added to over time as we update other sections of our engineering ordinances, which we kind of have in mind going into the future. So this new chapter itemizes which permit types are engineering and also creates some new permit types that we haven't had before. We are also in the process of creating a new engineering permit application. One has not existed. I think that will be very helpful to engineering to have more formal processes in place and also to have all of their permits tracked and run through BS&A like our building permits currently do. Again, engineering is kind of unique. We created 3 different categories for plan reviews and inspections. One being, residential subdivision. So, when you think about a major residential subdivision and all the work that engineering does to review the plans for the streets and the sidewalks, the utilities, the grading, the stormwater management, and then that amount of time that goes into inspecting all of those things, which again, usually take quite a long time to develop, as opposed to like a single building permit. The second type would be individual dwelling. So now that your subdivision is in and the individual sublots are being sold, what work needs to be permitted on that individual dwelling and what reviews need to occur there, what inspections need to occur there. And then third, like the non-residential projects, so anything that would be commercial, industrial, multifamily. So each of those has its own unique setup, kind of recognizing that each of those things is very different. So that's, I think, a step in the right direction. We also included some new calculations for plan review deposits so that the city would collect more upfront. We found ourselves requesting frequently for developers to replenish the deposit because we're going through it, especially for some of the larger projects. So we improved the language around the completion of grading, and also we increased the bond. In cases where we issue a certificate of occupants before the final grading is done, we are collecting really a small amount of money, and if we're collecting it so that the city would do it, in the case it doesn't get done, it was a drop in the bucket for what it would have cost, so we increased that a little bit. We also added fire hydrant use permits, which I think was formerly handled through a policy and not ordinance, so I'm not sure how we were collecting money for that, but we were. So we're trying to kind of fix those issues as we come across them. So, Mr. Chair, that's an outline of what this ordinance does, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lieber. Do any members of the committee have any questions or comments? I know when I read through this, it's very consistent with other things I've seen across the state of Ohio. We're growing as a community, and we have to grow with it, with how we approach things, how we collect money, how we do inspections, and having engineering and building working together. So I thought it was well put together. Mr. Mayor, do you have anything to add? Any other members of council? Okay. Any other members of council have any comments or questions?
Yeah, Mr. Winkle kind of alluded to this, but with regard to some of the new permit types that you mentioned, and then the breakdown of the plan reviews into the 3 areas, is that consistent with what other cities locally are generally doing for their engineering departments?
I think so. You know, we didn't do a broad canvas of other communities. We really looked at how we operate internally and try to keep it consistent with what our actual staff time is. So, you know, one, we don't want to collect too little and then wind up having to keep going back to applicants, but we also don't want to just be the bank holding other people's money. You know, we don't want to over collect either. So we try to find the right amount for what the work would be. That said, you know, this is probably far from perfect, and we do have the ability to fine tune as we go. So if we find we're, you know, for large projects, we're holding way too much, we can always come back and refine the calculation that we use. So we'll try and keep an eye on that. And after, you know, a year or so of using these new fees, we'll see what our over under was on actual staff time. And if adjustments are needed, we can do them at that time.
Thank you.
Is there any members of the audience want to discuss or have any comments on 2024-26? No? How you doing? All right, with that being said, I'd like to entertain a motion from someone.
Through the chair,
Yes.
I'd like to move to send this back to city council for their consideration.
Second.
Okay, it's moved by Swank and seconded by Abens to send it back to city council for consideration. All in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Not opposed. That carries 3-0. To send us back to council for further consideration. Seeing no more business before us in building and lands, this meeting is adjourned.